When most people think of Alaska, they imagine untouched wilderness, snow-capped mountains, endless forests, rivers that shine like glass, and skis lit by the northern lights. It feels pure, serene, and almost otherworldly. But if you've ever lived there or even traveled far enough away from the safety of the cities, you'll know Alaska has another side. It's a land of isolation, a place where you can walk for days and never see another human, where the silence is so deep it almost hums in your ears, and where sometimes that silence isn't empty at all. Locals whisper about it, strange disappearances, entire villages abandoned overnight, hunters who walk into the woods and are never seen again, pilots who send out one final radio message before their planes vanish without a trace. And of course, the infamous Alaska Triangle, a region where far too many people have gone missing for it to be coincidence. Some say it's the spirits of the land, angry at intruders. Others believe in cryptids, monstrous creatures said to roam the forests and coastlines. And then there are those who think it's something else entirely, something darker. Over the next hour, I want you to join me on a journey into this shadowed side of Alaska. 5 stories, each true, each terrifying, and each a reminder that nature doesn't always play by our rules. We'll begin with one of the strangest tales in Alaskan history, an entire village that vanished, a community of people who, one day, simply weren't there anymore. This is the story of Portlock. The story of Portlock begins in the early 1900s. Portlock, sometimes called Port Chatham, was a small fishing village on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. On the surface, it seemed like an ordinary settlement. Families lived in modest homes, fishermen worked the waters, hunters ventured into the thick forests to bring back meat. But beneath that quiet life, fear was always there. The villagers would speak of strange figures in the woods. They described a creature, taller than any man, covered in dark hair, moving silently through the trees. They called it Nantianak, something like a cousin to Bigfoot. And unlike the friendly legends you sometimes hear, this being was anything but gentle. At first, the stories were easy to dismiss. Hunters claimed they felt watched. Fishermen said they saw shadows moving along the cliffs. But soon, the fear grew harder to ignore. People began disappearing. Men would go out hunting in the morning and never return. Search parties would find the remains, sometimes torn apart, sometimes just gone. Other times, nothing was found at all. The village women whispered that Nantianek didn't just kill, it stalked. That it waited, following men silently until the moment was right. One man's body was discovered near the edge of the forest. His wounds didn't look like anything a bear or wolf could cause. They were brutal, violent, almost as if he'd been ripped open by massive hands. The fear became unbearable. Parents wouldn't let children play near the tree line. Hunters went out in groups, armed not just with rifles but with charms and prayers, hoping protection would hold. The forest that had once given them life now felt cursed. And then, sometime around the 1940s, the villagers made a decision. They left. Not gradually, not in small numbers, but all at once. Families packed what they could carry, boarded boats, and sailed away. Portlock was abandoned, left to rot under the endless Alaskan sky. Why? Ask the elders and they'll tell you the same thing. They were being hunted. Whatever lived in those woods wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was gone. So they fled. To this day, Portlock stands empty. The ruins of houses remain, rotting wood covered in moss. The fishing cannery still lies in pieces, rusted and broken. But no one lives there, not a single soul. And here's the chilling part. People who have tried to visit say the land still feels wrong. Hunters report eerie screams echoing through the valleys. Campers claim they hear heavy footsteps just beyond the trees at night. Even seasoned outdoorsmen refuse to stay long. A few brave researchers have gone to Portlock to investigate. Some have even claimed to find footprints, giant prints, too large for any normal human. Others have found nothing. but almost all of them described the same thing, a crushing sense of dread, as if the forest itself is alive and doesn't want them there. Think about that for a moment. An entire community gone, not because of famine or disease or war, but because they were too terrified to stay. The land around Portlock is still rich with fish, still fertile, still perfectly capable of supporting life. Yet no one has dared rebuild there. Even in a state as vast and wild as Alaska, where people pride themselves on surviving the harshest conditions, Portlock remains untouched. Maybe it was all superstition. Maybe the deaths were caused by wild animals and fear did the rest. But maybe, just maybe, there really was something in those woods, something waiting. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you had been a villager in Portlock, if your neighbors were disappearing, if hunters were being torn apart, if the forest itself felt like it was watching you, would you have stayed and fought, or would you have abandoned everything and fled? As terrifying as the story of Portlock is, you might dismiss it as a relic of the past, a ghost town with a legend attached. But strange things in Alaska didn't end with that abandoned village. In fact, even today, people continue to vanish without explanation. Our next story takes us into the wilderness once again. This time, it's about a group of hikers who set off on a trail in one of the most remote parts of the state and never came back. Alaska is a hiker's dream. Towering peaks, untouched forests and trails that stretch for miles without another soul in sight. But it's also a place where one wrong turn or one wrong encounter can cost you everything. This story is about a group of hikers who set out for what was supposed to be a week-long adventure in the wild. Experienced outdoorsmen, used to cold weather, used to rough terrain. They weren't reckless tourists. They knew what they were doing. And yet, none of them ever made it home. It began like countless other expeditions. A small group, 4 men and 2 women, met in Anchorage, checked their supplies and drove out toward the mountains. Their goal was to hike deep into the wilderness, far from marked trails, and spend time fishing, camping, and testing themselves against nature. They left behind detailed notes of their route. They told family and friends exactly when they'd be back. They had radios, flares, and plenty of provisions. On paper, everything looked perfect. For the first couple of days, radio transmissions confirmed their progress. They reported clear weather, beautiful scenery, and spirits high. But then, on the 3rd night, something changed. The last radio message they sent was short and strange. Static filled most of it, but one clear phrase cut through. "We're not alone out here." And then silence. Rescue crews were sent out once their return date passed. Dozens of searchers combed the mountains, helicopters scanned from above, dogs tracked the trails. For days they searched. What they found only deepened the mystery. The hikers' camp was discovered in a small clearing. Their tents were still standing. Their gear was neatly arranged. Food remained in bags untouched. It was as if they had simply walked away. But the strangest detail was the footprints, dozens of them leading away from the camp. At first, they looked normal, human boots pressed into soft earth. But after about half a mile, things grew confusing. The prints began to scatter, as if the group had split apart in different directions. Some led uphill, others down toward a river, others vanished into thick brush. It made no sense. Why would experienced hikers abandon their gear, split apart, and head into dangerous terrain at night? Searchers followed the tracks as best they could. A few personal items were found along the way, a torn backpack strap, a canteen, a scrap of fabric, but no bodies, no sign of a struggle, nothing that explained why they left camp in the first place. Then came the more unsettling reports. A helicopter pilot scanning the area claimed he saw movement in the trees, tall figures, darker than the shadows, keeping pace just inside the forest line. When searchers went to check, nothing was there. Some of the rescue dogs refused to continue down certain paths. They would whine, growl, and pull back, as if something invisible blocked their way. And one searcher swore he heard a scream, high-pitched, carried across the valley. But when the group stopped to listen, the forest fell silent. After weeks of searching, the official report closed with no conclusion. The hikers were declared missing, presumed dead. Their families never got closure. To this day, no remains have been found. Some believe they were attacked by wildlife, bears or wolves, but that doesn't explain the calmness of the abandoned camp. Predators don't wait for you to walk out into the woods and split apart before attacking. Others think hypothermia set in, causing them to panic and wander. But it wasn't cold enough, and their supplies were untouched. Then there are those who point to stranger explanations, that the hikers encountered something in the forest, something that drove them to flee, something that knew how to scatter them, confuse them, and erase every trace. In Alaska, stories like this aren't rare. Search and rescue volunteers will tell you about places where compasses spin uselessly, where GPS devices go haywire, and where people vanish without a sound. Sometimes a shoe is found, sometimes a scrap of clothing, but often nothing at all. And it's that nothingness that terrifies most, because it means whatever happened to those hikers was quick, complete, and final. Imagine it. You're camping with friends in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. You have food, shelter, fire, everything you need. Then one night, something outside your tent makes you realize you're not alone. Do you step out to investigate? Do you run? Do you try to stick together, or does fear scatter you in all directions? Because if it could happen to them, prepared, experienced, and careful, it could happen to anyone. So here's my question to you. If you were deep in those woods, and you heard someone whisper outside your tent when you knew no one else was supposed to be there, what would you do? The story of the missing hikers is haunting because it leaves us with nothing but questions. No answers, no closure, just the chilling certainty that they walked into the wild and never walked back out. But not all Alaskan mysteries happen on the ground. Sometimes the danger comes from above. Our next story is about a bush pilot, an experienced flyer who knew Alaska's skis better than most, and yet even he couldn't escape what was waiting out there. This is the story of Carl, the pilot who vanished mid-flight after sending one final cryptic message. Flying in Alaska isn't like flying anywhere else. The terrain is brutal, the weather shifts without warning, and there are vast stretches of wilderness where no roads exist. For many communities, bush pilots are lifelines, the only way to deliver supplies, transport hunters, or reach medical help. One such pilot was Carl. By all accounts, Carl was one of the best. He'd been flying since his teens, logging thousands of hours in every condition imaginable. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't inexperienced. If anyone knew how to survive Alaska's skis, it was him. In the summer of 1972, Carl set out on what should have been a routine flight. His job was simple: transport 2 passengers and some cargo from Anchorage to a small town on the edge of the wilderness. The weather forecast looked clear. His plane was well maintained. Nothing about the trip raised alarm. But as the hours passed, something went wrong. Carl's first radio transmission was calm, reporting strong winds but otherwise smooth flying. Then, about halfway through the flight, his tone changed. There was static on the line and his words came through distorted. "Seeing something, can't explain, not a plane." The tower responded, asking him to repeat. He came back again, his voice tighter now. "It's following me, large too fast." That was the last coherent message anyone ever heard from Carl. Moments later, only static remained. Search efforts launched immediately. Dozens of planes and helicopters scanned the skis and wilderness below. They traced his flight path, combed valleys, rivers, mountaintops, but there was nothing. No wreckage, no signal, no trace of Carl, his passengers, or the plane. The official report listed it as another disappearance in the Alaska Triangle, but that didn't stop the rumors. Other pilots in the region began sharing their own stories. Objects in the sky that didn't move like any known aircraft, flashes of light that darted faster than the human eye could follow, and an overwhelming sense of being watched from above. Some said Carl had been taken, his plane pulled off course by something beyond our understanding. Others thought it was government experiments, hidden deep in the Alaskan wilderness, and Carl had stumbled too close. And of course, there were those who whispered about alien involvement. After all, how does a plane simply vanish into thin air without a single scrap of debris? Even more chilling were the rumors about the radio tower logs. Workers claimed that after Carl's final words, the static continued for several minutes. Within that static, some swore they could hear faint voices, not Carl, not his passengers, but something else. Words in a language no one recognized. Almost like whispers bleeding through from another world. The families of Carl and his passengers never got answers. They waited, hoped, prayed. But the wilderness never gave up its secret. And in Alaska, that silence is often the loudest answer of all. Think about it, planes don't just vanish. Even in crashes, there's evidence. Wreckage, smoke, something. But with Carl, there was nothing, not a trace, as if he'd been plucked out of the sky and erased. Now imagine being in that cockpit. The controls steady in your hands, the engine humming, the vast emptiness of Alaska stretching below you. And then out of nowhere, you realize something is behind you, something fast, massive, and unexplainable. You call for help, your voice shaking, and then silence. So here's the question. If you were in Carl's place, mid-flight over endless wilderness, and you saw something chasing your plane that no one could explain, would you keep flying? Would you try to land? Or would you simply close your eyes and hope it passed you by? Carl's disappearance adds another layer to Alaska's mysteries. It's not just the forests or the mountains that swallow people whole, it's the skis too. And if the wilderness below isn't safe and the skis above aren't safe, then where can you run? Our next story takes us to a cabin in the woods, where a family discovered that even the walls around you can't always keep the darkness out. This is the story of the cabin in the Alaskan wilderness, where something outside refused to let the family inside sleep. Life in Alaska often means isolation. For some, that's not a burden, it's a dream. A place far from noise, far from crowds, where the only sounds are wind in the trees and snow crunching underfoot. That's exactly what one family wanted when they built their cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness. The father had worked hard for years to save enough. The mother longed for quiet mornings, for nights without the glow of city lights. Their children loved the idea of adventure, of growing up where every day felt like stepping into a storybook. So they built their dream, a cabin surrounded by towering pines, a wood stove for warmth and endless silence. For a time it was perfect, until the night the silence broke. It began with scratching. Gentle at first, like branches brushing against the wooden walls, the father dismissed it. Just the wind, he told his wife. But as the night deepened, the scratches grew heavier, more deliberate, not branches, not the wind, something alive. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, crunching through the snow outside. They circled the cabin once, twice, and then stopped just beneath the window. The family froze. The mother pulled her children close, whispering for them to stay quiet. The father, gripping his rifle, pushed the door open and stepped outside. The night air burned his lungs, his breath clouding in the cold. The snow stretched white and empty all around. No figures, no animals, not even tracks, only silence. Relieved but uneasy, he stepped back in, bolting the door shut. But almost immediately, his relief turned to dread, because the footsteps hadn't been outside at all. They were on the roof. Creaking, dragging, shifting weight. Something massive paced above them, slow and deliberate as though testing the roof's strength. The father raised his rifle, staring upward. The children whimpered, clutching at their mother's arms. The sound moved across the roof, then paused directly above the family. The cabin groaned, its beams straining under the weight of whatever stood there. And then the banging began. First on the walls, then on the windows. A rhythmic pounding that shook the cabin, rattling dishes, making the lantern flame flicker. At one point, the mother swore she saw a shadow cross the frosted glass, not the size of a man, larger, shoulders too broad, a shape far too tall. All night the creature circled, packing the roof, dragging claws against the walls, testing the windows. The family sat in silence, barely breathing, afraid that a single sound might provoke it. And then, just as dawn broke, it stopped. The roof fell silent, the footsteps faded, the forest returned to stillness as if nothing had happened. But the family knew better. Something had come for them, something had prowled around their cabin all night. They didn't wait to see if it would return. They packed nothing. They didn't look back. They left their food on the table, their belongings scattered, and fled through the snow until the cabin was only a shadow behind them. When locals later visited, they found the place in ruins. Doors ripped off their hinges, windows smashed inward, furniture overturned, claw marks carved deep into the wood. And in the snow outside, one final detail, enormous footprints leading into the forest. But the prints didn't last long. A short trail and then nothing, as though whatever left them had vanished into the air. The cabin still stands, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Locals warn against visiting. Some say they've seen lights flickering in its windows at night, though the cabin has no electricity. Others claim they've heard the sound of dragging footsteps on the roof when they dared to walk too close. The family never returned. Their dream of a peaceful life in the wilderness ended in one night of terror, and to this day, no one can say what came to their cabin. Now imagine yourself there, the roof groaning above you, shadows pressing against the windows, your children trembling in your arms. Would you open the door and face whatever waits outside? Or would you sit in silence, praying that morning comes before the walls give in? The family's escape proves one thing. Sometimes, no matter how strong your walls, you can't keep the darkness out. And in Alaska, there are places where the darkness isn't just a visitor. It's the land itself. Because our next story isn't about a single cabin, a single pilot, or a single village. It's about an entire region that swallows people, planes, and families whole. This is the story of the Alaska Triangle ***. Every country has its mysteries. For the United States, one of the most infamous is the Bermuda Triangle. But few people know that Alaska has its own version, one far larger, far colder, and far deadlier. It's called the Alaska Triangle, and it stretches between Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow. Within this vast section of land lies endless forests, jagged mountains, frozen tundra, and an almost supernatural silence. It is beautiful, but it is also cursed. Since 1988, more than 16,000 people have vanished inside the triangle. Entire planes disappear without a trace. Hikers vanish mid-trail. Families drive into the wilderness and are never seen again. In many cases, no wreckage is ever found. No footprints, no radio calls for help, just silence. One of the most chilling cases happened in 1972, when a twin-engine plane carrying 4 men, including U.S. Congressman Hale Boggs***, vanished while flying through the triangle. What followed was one of the largest search and rescue missions in American history. The military sent over 40 aircraft, hundreds of men, and advanced equipment to scour the land. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace that the plane had ever existed. To this day, it remains one of the greatest unsolved disappearances in U.S. history. Skeptics argue that Alaska's wilderness is unforgiving. Sudden storms, magnetic anomalies that mess with compasses, and jagged peaks that can easily swallow wreckage. All of these make sense on paper. But if natural causes explain everything, why are there so many disappearances without a single trace? Because in Alaska, the stories go deeper than science. Indigenous legends speak of ancient spirits that guard the land, punishing anyone who trespasses too far. Some talk about beings that can lure travelers off the trail, making them vanish without a sound. Others whisper of portals hidden in the mountains, doorways to another realm that open only for those unlucky enough to stumble upon them. Pilots have reported compasses spinning wildly as if magnetic fields are twisting reality itself. Radios cut out for no reason. Lights appear in the sky strange, darting movements that no natural phenomenon or human aircraft could explain. Many describe the same thing, a suffocating sense of dread, as if unseen eyes follow every mile. Search and rescue workers tell their own stories. Helicopters that suffer sudden mechanical failures when entering the region. Men who are overcome with such intense fear during missions that they refuse to continue. It's as if the triangle doesn't just take lives, it protects its secrets. And the disappearances continue. Each year more people vanish. Hunters, families, hikers, pilots. The wilderness swallows them whole, leaving behind nothing but questions. Now imagine this, you're flying over that frozen expanse. Your compass begins to spin. Your radio cuts out. Outside your window, strange lights flicker across the horizon. And then, in the silence, you feel it, the realization that you are being pulled somewhere you don't belong. So here's the question. Would you ever dare step foot, or set flight, into a place known for swallowing thousands of lives without leaving a single trace? Or would you, like many Alaskans, avoid the triangle at all costs, knowing that some mysteries aren't meant to be challenged? From the abandoned village of Portlock to the missing hikers, to the final radio calls of a terrified pilot, from the family who fled their dream cabin, to the cursed wilderness of the Alaska Triangle, these stories remind us of one truth. Alaska is beautiful, but it is also merciless. Its vast landscapes hold wonders beyond imagination, and terrors beyond explanation. Some believe these are just tales, folklore, exaggerations, natural tragedies dressed up as legends. But the silence left behind by the vanished, the ruins of abandoned homes, and the chilling words of those who encountered something unexplainable say otherwise. Because in Alaska, the wilderness isn't empty. It watches, it waits, and sometimes it takes. So the next time you hear the wind howling through the trees, or see shadows moving where no one should be, ask yourself, is it just the wilderness, or is it something older, something darker that has always been here? Thank you for joining me on this journey through Alaska's most haunting stories. And remember, never take silence for granted. Because in the wrong place, silence is the loudest warning of all.